President Donald Trump's 50% tariff has caused an uproar in Canada. The Carne-Trump standoff at the G7 summit has begun to turn into a crisis affecting the global supply chain. G7 leaders found themselves in the middle of an unexpected steel storm. While U.S. President Donald Trump challenged Ottawa, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney remained resolute, with harsh statements flying back and forth. Factories from Montreal to Vancouver shut down, and streets filled with protesters. Automotive stocks turned red on Wall Street. So, how did the Carne-Trump standoff break up the G7 table and open a new fault line in global trade? Well, we will examine the details of the latest developments around the world together. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like our videos to stay up to date with our content. The mountain road leading to the Lakeview Chalet at the foot of the Rocky Mountains was the scene of a tension never before witnessed by a G7 convoy. The sound of slogans mixed with the scent of pine trees rose along with the sound of banners flapping in the wind. And even the helicopter blades could not drown out the roar. Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who had grown accustomed to the soothing language of central banking over many years, appeared unusually resolute. This time, he was not facing an interest rate chart, but the steel hard lines of tariff schedules. Donald Trump, unwilling to back down, sent Ottawa a clear message: either you accept my terms or you pay the price. Carney responded with equal composure, saying, "My country is not for sale." The tariff crisis was not just a matter of numbers. It had, become a vice that squeezed the supply lines stretching from the suburbs of Montreal to the mining camps of Yellowknife. Trump's sudden doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminum threatened to shut down hydroelectric-powered smelting plants in Quebec, while no parts lights flashed on assembly lines in Ontario. Meanwhile, the president, showering praise on steel workers in Pennsylvania, told cameras, "I'm bringing jobs back." But shift lists were getting shorter in Detroit, and trucks idled at a logistics center in Mississauga. Even before Carney arrived at the mountain retreat that would host the summit, the streets of Canada were, already filled with protesters. In front of the U.S. Embassy on Sussex Drive, the granite steps that had served as a backdrop for tourist photos for years had turned into a massive open-air assembly. High school graduates, sledding rink operators, accountants, retirees, all held signs reading, "Allies don't bow to bullies." The protesters were not protesting against America, but against President Trump's refusal to negotiate. And honestly, they didn't even need to shout to get their message across. The silent crowd's presence was enough to unsettle even the most stubborn leader of the G7. The protests in Ottawa spread to Halifax Harbor, Vancouver's Granville Street, and even Windsor Streets across the river from Minneapolis on the same day. A note leaked from the embassy stated that Washington was concerned that the anger in the Canadian public is not directed at Shanghai or Paris, but at North America itself. Smiles were, frozen as the first friendly photo was taken at the Mountain Lodge. Trump, shaking Carr's hand, turned to the camera and made sure to say, "I'm the tariff man." Carney, meanwhile, whispered only, "Nothing will be signed until fair rules are back." As he walked to his podium before the press conference began, the other leaders at the summit table knew that the diplomatic choreography they had grown accustomed to over the years had been, completely shattered. French President Emmanuel Macron had indirectly responded to Trump's suggestion that the U.S. could buy Greenland, saying, "The Arctic is not for sale." In a speech in Greenland a few days earlier, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen found the phrase "protectionism" is a hidden tax on the family budget provocative when she arrived in Alberta, but did not remove it from the text. All this background turned the private meeting in the Mountain Lodge into, honestly, a powder keg. In minutes that were not recorded, Trump first suggested that Russia should be invited back to the table. When President Trump said, "If Putin were here, the Ukraine issue would not have escalated into a disaster." The German chancellor averted her gaze from the table and Carney closed his notebook. As the topic shifted to steel and then to automobiles within minutes, Trump said that Canadian automotive exports can't come for free anymore, adding, "If necessary, taxes will go up. A 50% tax is just a teaser." Carney responded with a cold northern wind, saying, "The supply chain is a single lane. If you build a barrier, both lanes will be closed." Even before the global press release was published, investment banks noted that if tariffs continue, North American automotive production could shrink by 10% in 2 quarters. The manager of a smelting plant in Quebec called a local radio station and said, 500 workers are watching the words exchanged between Washington and Ottawa to bring bread home to their families. A white goods manufacturer in Chicago that uses Canadian sheet metal announced that it would shut down its factory for 2 weeks. The first wave was thus felt in the labor market. On the second evening of the summit, the U.S. delegation left dinner early and, returned to their mountain retreat. Trump's advisors watched the images of the protests in Ottawa on television. Despite this, information leaked from the Edmonton Air Base indicated that the American plane's departure time had actually been brought forward. The next morning, Trump kept his remarks brief, saying in the press corridor, "We will reach an agreement with Canada, but we will not be delayed." Journalists were unable to get an answer to the question, will tariffs rise even further on Monday? Carney remained in the meeting room at the time, finalizing the text of a short but harsh statement. The text was not an explicit threat. However, it referred to violation files that would be brought before the World Trade Organization, promised credit insurance and export incentives to Canadian producers, and said that if the U.S. did not back down within 60 days, it would move to equivalent customs practices and strategic supply diversification. As translation teams worked on the text in French and German, slogans could be heard from outside. Banners reading "Yes to Trade," "No to Threats" fluttered in the wind, and orange Canadian flags illuminated the night. The expected joint statement from the summit did not materialize, and signatures were missing. At the final dinner, Macron, von Leyen, and Carney appeared together before the press. Macron said, "Anyone who uses protectionism as an excuse is not protecting the free market, but short-term populism." Von der Leyen sent a warning to the U.S. that sounded like a joke, saying, "If your supply chain stops with the push of a button, you are not competitive." Carney, without taking his eyes off the camera, said, "Canada extends a hand of friendship, but it does not applaud those who twist an arm." At the same time in Washington, White House reporters were asking whether Trump would raise tariffs further. The White House press secretary gathered his papers and said, "The president is flexible, but our interests are not negotiable." This statement, honestly, marked a new turning point in the turbulent history of the North American free trade system. Wall Street saw automotive and construction stocks in the red at Monday's opening. The Toronto Stock Exchange lowered its profit forecast for mining companies as the Canadian dollar lost value. Protests continued in Canada after the G7 summit. Demonstrations in Ottawa did not turn violent. Crowds chose to raise banners and march silently. A retired teacher said, "America is our neighbor, but it can't just pull down the fence if it wants to." A young software engineer said, "We've suddenly gone from the tech sector to a steel debate because the supply chain is like dominoes." Research companies scanning social media reported that posts with the hashtag #NoTariffs reached 5 million views in 5 hours. Amid all this noise, another preparation was quietly underway. Canada began telephone diplomacy to form a separate bloc with the EU and Japan on critical minerals. Each of these minerals, such as lithium, nickel, and graphite, was indispensable for the battery future of North American industry. So, the seeds that were sown during Trudeau's terms really started to sprout with Carney's emphasis on, strategic autonomy. Now, Trump's team described this news as a, hostile energy cartel. But honestly, market experts commented that these were rational steps, all in the name of supply security. When the summit ended, a Canadian Air Force military transport plane actually refused to carry the U.S. delegation's heavy luggage, even though it was required by protocol. This was, without a doubt, an unprecedented gesture in logistics cooperation between the two armies. But this step contained a clear message. If you put our infrastructure on your retaliation list, you will have to carry your own aid. Pentagon sources tried to remain calm. However, rumors leaked to the press that the North Command's alert level had been raised by 1 notch. In the coming days, all eyes will once again turn to Carney and Trump, as the joint financing of the large LNG terminal in New Brunswick will be on the table at the end of August. Washington wants to sell gas, and Ottawa wants to be a bridge to Europe. But, unless the steel tariffs are lifted, the Canadian Parliament is unlikely to approve the loan. The tariff is also locking the gas pipeline valve. A single sentence is blocking multiple industrial arteries. When the summer rains began in Canadian cities, the protest crowds had thinned out. But banners reading, "Negotiation is a right, not a threat," still hung from apartment balconies. These banners could be read even from the colorful flower pots next to them. Mark Carney told reporters before embarking on a month-long diplomatic tour, "This crisis will end. The question is, Who will pay the price? Meanwhile, President Donald Trump repeated his promise to steel workers at a rally in Pennsylvania, saying, "I will not let anyone play games with us." The noise that began at the foot of the Rocky Mountains is now mingling with the hammering sounds of shipyards on the Atlantic coast. As the steel heart of North America struggles to maintain its rhythm amid political turmoil, the future of two neighbors is being reduced to a simple formula. Until the question of whose tariff is permanent and whose protests are enduring is answered, the atmosphere along this mountain road will not be a mere geographical point, but really a vivid reminder of the fragility of global supply chains. As diplomacy takes a breath, its echoes will not fade. What are your thoughts on this matter? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching.